How many of you out there actually are U of H grads? Pretty much everyone. The other ones, who here works at U of H? So I think we pretty much have a connection to U of H every time. I know I was talking to someone earlier, and they were asking me why I asked that. We normally have a few grads from other schools here. I know we've got some. But if you've never had a chance, or if you're from U of H, or you work at U of H, and you never had a chance to talk to Welcome Wilson, it's definitely one of the most interesting talks you can ever have. Early this morning, I got really lucky, and I got to go over there and talk to him a little bit, and just the amount of information he can give you about U of H. He was talking about how he sang in Frontier Fiesta in the 40s. That's awesome. If you've never been to Frontier Fiesta, hearing the fact that back in the 40s and the 50s, Time magazine called it the greatest college show on earth, and it was this huge, huge deal, and hearing the fact that Welcome was there for that. And now he's the head of the political action committee for U of H, and you'll still get the emails about that. And so he's still at the forefront and working for U of H, and I don't think we have a better alumni out there. So we're really excited to have him here today. Couple things just to give you an idea about Welcome if you haven't ever met him before. He actually went to U of H in the 40s, graduated in 49. In the 50s, he served as the executive office of the president under Eisenhower and JFK. I've got pieces of his bio that I thought were crazy interesting. He witnessed the atom bomb test in Nevada and the hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll in Pacific. I mean, that's crazy. That's awesome. He's been a Houston real estate developer for 58 years. His first projects were down in Galveston and Tiki Island and Jamaica Beach. So if you've seen those before, those are still two of the best developments in Galveston. Here, way later on, Tiki Island, I went down and worked in Galveston for a little bit, and everybody who I worked with down there who actually lived in Galveston was telling me if I ever moved down there, move to Tiki Island. That's a place to be. So after all that time, Tiki Island's still one of the best developments you have down there. He's won a bunch of awards before. He's in the Texas Business Hall of Fame. He's got the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Houston Business Journal and an honorary doctor's degree from the University of Houston. And as I said before, he's now the chairman of the U of H Political Action Committee and longtime chairman of the U of H Board of Regents. And so with all the information he can give us on real estate, on U of H, I'm really excited to have him here. So please join me in welcoming Welcome Wilson.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin asked me what he should say in introducing me, and I said, Kevin, praise me as much as you can, because after all, you're not under oath. Thank you for that nice introduction, Kevin. The University of Houston and I are the same age. I started at the University of Houston when I was about 19 as a junior. The University of Houston was 19. Now we're both 87 years old. And although the University of Houston has never been more on the cutting edge than it is today, I, on the other hand, am moving more slowly. In fact, Cindy, if you hear me talking about happy hour, I'm talking about a nap. I never thought I'd say to myself, oh, to be 70 again. I have some notes here. Actually, I have a photographic memory, but sometimes I'm out of film. I used that line before a high school class about a month ago. Not one person laughed or even smiled. And so afterward, the teacher came up to me and said, Mr. Wilson, these kids have never heard of film for cameras. I guess I'm over the hill. Of course, I don't remember being on top of the hill, but I graduated from Bauer College of Business. We didn't call it that then, 65 years ago. And we had some people graduated cum laude, others even magna cum laude. I graduated thank you laude. Today, I'd like to talk about the early days of business in Houston, the 1940s and 50s. And then I'd like to talk about the early days at the University of Houston. In 1945, I was a student at the Brownsville Junior College, and when I turned 17, the law required that I register for the draft. So I registered, and I got my orders to report for World War II, to report on September 17th, 1945. So I finished my college year, went to work as a longshoreman on the docks in Brownsville, Texas, working on banana boats and lead boats, because I felt like I needed to get into shape for the military. So in September, we had won the war in Europe. Hitler had been defeated. I was a newscaster on the local radio station. All the jobs in Brownsville, Texas were held by teenagers because if you were a man, you were gone in World War II. So we had won the war in Europe, and the war in Pacific was very daunting because the Japanese still controlled most of the Pacific, including all of China and so forth. But in August, Harry Truman dropped 2 atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. The war ended 3 weeks later. So suddenly, the war is over. So I registered for another year at Brownsville Junior College and graduated a year later. When I graduated from junior college, no one had ever heard of the University of Houston, except my father. It was only about 17, 18, 19 years old, and nobody had ever heard of it. People from Brownsville, Texas went to the University of Texas or Texas A&M, and occasionally the odd graduate would go to SMU. I don't mean that odd graduate despairingly, but my father felt like that Houston, Texas would be the business capital of the world in years to come. In metropolitan Houston at the time, we had 600,000 people. You know what it is today? 6.5 million people. He was right. So he felt if we came to the University of Houston, we'd get a leg up in business. So we agreed to come, and he drove us up here on in September of 1946. And I'll never forget what he said when he dropped us off. He took us to trailer number 67 on campus. These were Army surplus house trailers, which was the only housing on the campus. We had number 67. It was about the length of a big SUV. Had a bunk at each end, a little kitchenette in the middle, and the bathroom was a block and a half away. Not very luxurious. So he dropped us off and he said, boys, I paid your first semester's tuition. I paid the first month's rent on this house trailer, $10. And here's $50 each. And whenever you boys need anything, just call me up on the telephone. Whatever you need and when you need it, call me up on the phone, and I'll explain how you can get by without it. And we never heard from him financially again, nor did we expect to. Things were different in those days. I got a job working for the Cougar newspaper on campus, selling advertising, 20% commission. And we didn't eat regularly, but we got along just fine. Now back to my notes. I only remember the important things, whatever they were. What was Houston like in 1946? Well, Jesse Jones was Mr. Houston. Let me give you an example. There were 9 hotels in downtown Houston. Mr. Jones owned 7 of them. There were 12 office buildings in downtown Houston. Mr. Jones owned 9 of them. He was Mr. Houston. He owned the biggest newspaper, the Chronicle. He owned the biggest radio station, KTRH. He owned the biggest bank, National Bank of Commerce. He owned the tallest building. He was Mr. Houston. I read in this morning's paper that they're tearing down Sunday one of his last buildings still standing, the Houston Club building downtown. The golf building is still standing and now called the Chase building or something. But I think Chase will be the only one left after Houston, after the Houston Club goes down, Houston Club building. By the way, when he built the Houston Club building, he built it on top of a parking garage, and he built it specifically for the Houston Club, and he leased it to the Houston Club for 50 years for $1 a year. That's the kind of guy that Mr. Jones was. Let me give you another example. In the 1930s, he started Houston Endowment. Notice he didn't call it Jones Endowment. It wasn't the Jones Foundation. It was Houston Endowment. That's the kind of guy he was. In the 1930s, during the Depression, banks were going busted all over America. So 2 banks in Houston out of 6 got into financial trouble and were about to go under. Mr. Jones called all the bankers together in the top of the Gulf building in his office. George Strake is there now, by the way. And he said, we can't let this happen. 5 hours later, he had browbeat the other bankers into furnishing the money to keep those 2 banks afloat. So Houston was the only metropolitan area in America that did not have any bank failures during the Depression. In those days, there were another 10 or so people in business who were major leaders. Gus Wortham, George R. Brown, R.E. Bob Smith, Judge Jim Elkins, Johnny Crooker, Colonel Bates, Leon Jaworski, Jim Abercrombie, John Meekum, H.R. Cullen. I knew all of them, and I was only 25 years old. If you want to know how a 25-year-old guy knew and was close to the major leaders of Houston, ask me during the questions. Gus Wortham founded American General Insurance Company, one of the largest in Texas. And in my days, in early days in Houston business, I would go to see him to get loans. And Mr. Wortham personally made the loans of any size. And so I'd be sitting there making my pitch. He'd be sitting at his swivel chair at his desk, and he'd be twirling his glasses like this, not making any comment. And then he'd ask a few questions, and then he'd say, let me talk to the boys. The boys were J.W. Link Jr., whose father was the developer of Montrose. In fact, the big house on Montrose Boulevard, that's now the headquarters for St. Thomas University, was it was the house that J.W. Link Jr. grew up in. The other one was Mr. Wortham. I don't even know Mr. Wortham's first name, but he was very dignified and very stern in his look. So he would talk to them, and I always got the loan. Don't ask me how, but for example, when there were 5 Marriott hotels in the entire world, I got a bank loan from American General Insurance Company to build number 6. Now there are 5,000 Marriott hotels in the world. But things were simple and straightforward and easy in those days, it seemed to me. George R. Brown. George and Herman Brown founded a company called Brown and Root, now called KBR, one of the largest construction companies in the world. Herman was the driving force behind the organization. He was stern and tough and whatever. George Brown was easier to get along with, more positive and et cetera. In fact, I believe he was a cheerleader at Rice. At least that's what Albert Thomas told me. But Mr. Brown was a civic leader, and he was, I'll never forget, I think it was in the 1970s, he went to the city council and begged them to build the basketball arena downtown, not at the Summit next door, where Kenneth Snitzer was developing Greenway Plaza. And he said that we've got to keep downtown vital and on and on and on. They didn't listen to him, and they built it at the Summit. And then now, 40 years later, they built Toyota Center back downtown. In fact, downtown, as you may remember, or not, began to die. And it wasn't until Bob Lanier became mayor of Houston that downtown Houston made a comeback and revitalized, and they bought the Rice Hotel, which Mr. Jones built, and made it into luxury apartments and other things and so forth. But so now downtown is very vital and a going concern. R.E. Bob Smith. R.E. Bob Smith had a big head of white hair. He was a powerful man, looked powerful. In the summertime, he would wear T-shirts, or golf shirts is a better way to describe them. And he'd be walking down Main Street say, hi, partner. And Bob Smith was the largest landowner in Harris County, Kevin. I'll never forget, I worked for him for a while, and he bought a piece of land way out Westheimer, 500 acres. He paid $1,250 an acre for it. So he and I drove out there to look at it, and so I made the comment, you know, isn't it a shame? Here I am just now going to the real estate business, and all the good deals like this one are gone. Bob Smith stopped the car and he said, "You silly Peckerwood. Don't you realize that the real estate boom in Houston has only begun?" He said, "Now a bank will lend you money to buy a piece of land. That's unprecedented. No bank would ever make you a loan on land before." He said, "The boom has only begun." By the way, if you want to know what a Peckerwood is, ask me during the questions. The 500 acres that he bought that day, he went on to buy other acreage, ended up with 7,000 acres. It stretched all the way to Richmond, Texas. Today it's called both sides of the West Belt. He owned land west of River Oaks that's now known as both sides of Loop 610. He had land everywhere. The biggest landowner in Harris County. In the 1960s, I got a charter for a bank in Houston, Texas. If you want to know how a guy with $600 on his financial statement got a charter for a bank, ask me during the questions. So I got this charter, and I had no money, so I needed to capitalize the bank, about $1 million. So I went to see Judge Jim Elkins, one of the leaders of Houston. He was chairman of the largest bank in Houston, the First City National Bank Bank. He was head of Vincent Elkins, the largest law firm in Texas, and a very powerful man. So I made my pitch to him for him to lend me 100% of the capital that I needed to open this bank. So Mr. Elkins listened politely. He said, well, who's going to run this bank? And I said, well, I am. He said, well, tell me about your banking experience. And I said, well, I've got a lot of experience borrowing money. So he kind of shook his head, and he said, well, let me talk around, and we'll be back in touch. That afternoon, Bill Kitt called me. He was a banker at that bank. And he said, we'll make you the loan, but we'll do it only if Walter Mischer comes in and owns 51% of the stock. So if you bring in Walter Mischer, we'll make you a 100% loan on the bank. Well, I was young and inexperienced, and knew nothing about business, by the way. I thought Dun and Brad Street was an intersection. So I said, well, I'm not going to do that. Thanks a lot, but I'm not going to do that. Well, that afternoon, Walter Mischer, who I knew, called me. And he said, welcome, I'm so embarrassed. I just want you to know that was not my idea. That was their idea. He said, come on down to my bank, and let's see if we can't make you the loan. So I went down there. He made the 100% loan, and I opened Homestead Bank. And by the way, in the 1980s, when all the banks were going busted, it's one of a half a dozen banks in Houston out of 75 that did not go under. It survived the 1980s. I had long since sold the bank by then, but anyway, things were simple in those days if you knew the right people. If you want to know about any of these other important people, business people, like Johnny Crooker or Colonel Bates or whatever, ask me during the questions. By the way, let me mention Welcome Wilson Jr. is leaving. Welcome Jr. You know, I was chairman of the Board of Regents a long time, and now I'm not even a member of the Board of Regents. I've gone from who's who to who's he. The governor replaced me on the Board of Regents with Welcome Wilson Jr., and he's now the vice chairman. Tillman Fertitta is the chairman. Thank you, Welcome. Welcome's got to go buy a building. You know, being replaced by your son sounds warm and fuzzy, right? The problem is, Welcome is my worst critic. My worst critic. Last week, I said, Welcome, did you hear my last speech? He said, I hope so. The worst, however, was when he first went to the Board of Regents meeting several years ago, when he first got on the board, and somehow my advanced age came up at the meeting. And so Roger Welder of Victoria, a regent, turned to Welcome and said, well, exactly how old is Welcome Sr. anyway? And Welcome said, let me put it this way. When Welcome Sr. was a teenager, the Dead Sea was only sick. He's my worst critic. Let me talk for a minute, if I could, about early days at the University of Houston. When I registered in September of 1946, the university had announced that registration would be at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. There had been 3,000 students in the spring semester. And at 11 o'clock on Wednesday in September of 1946, there were 10,500 people in a single line at the gymnasium, 4 abreast going a mile down Calhoun, returning GIs. The population went from 3,000 in the spring semester to 10,500 in the fall. There were only 3 permanent buildings on the campus at the time: the Roy Cullen Building, the Science Building, and the Recreation Building, now torn down. There were many, many surplus Army buildings, Quonset huts and things like that on the campus, where most of the students went for classes, including 100 house trailers that were Army surplus where the veterans lived. It was a interesting time for me because the University of Houston had no rules. They had no traditions. So we made everything up as we went along. Later on, after I returned from the Korean War, I was elected to the board of directors of the Ex-Students Association. We didn't call it the Alumni Association, which we formed in 1947, because we didn't have enough graduates for the Alumni Association. We called it the Ex-Students Association. And I remember when I went on the board of directors, I was about 26, 25 or something. And we decided that we needed more prestige for the board of directors. So we wanted to go out and get prominent business people to serve on the board of directors, Kevin. Trouble is, no prominent business people had graduated from the University of Houston. And I remember we finally found a vice president of South Main State Bank who had graduated from the University of Houston. So that's the highest ranking business person we could find to be on the board of directors. It was a different time. Today, our graduates include the president of Shell Oil Company and the president of Neiman Marcus, only to mention one of many, many. A couple of weeks ago, I went on a 30-day diet. How do I look? So far, I've lost 14 days. I was appointed to the Board of Regents about 8 or 9 years ago by Governor Rick Perry. And I won't say how I got appointed, but let me just comment that begging had a lot to do with it. And what an honor for me to be on the board of directors. But let me tell you about my proudest moment. My first job as chairman of the Board of Regents was to hire a new president. Jay Gouge had taken a job at Auburn, his alma mater, as president, and so me and the Board of Regents had to hire a new president. So the search committee brought forth 3 people, any one of which would have made a great president for the University of Houston. The last one we interviewed was Dr. Renew Couture, and she made a nice presentation and seemed to be well qualified and so forth. When she finished the interview, she turned to me and said, And Mr. Chairman, I've got fire in the belly. Well, I want to tell you folks, that did it for me. I've always had fire in the belly. And that's exactly what we needed. So we hired her. What a game changer she has been for the University of Houston. Don't you agree? A game changer. She has electrified the University of Houston. For the first time in history, the faculty senate, the student body, the alumni organization, and the staff council are all on the same page. They're all pulling together. She has unified everybody at the University of Houston. She has electrified the business community in Houston. It's startling the way she is taking the university forward at warp speed. Let me give you a couple of examples of why I think she's great. When she became president that year, in the entering freshmen, we had 3 members of the National Merit Scholars. We had 3 National Merit Scholars in the freshman class. In September, we had 24 members of the National Merit Scholars. 24. In my day at the University of Houston, we used to have to drag the streets to get people to come to the University of Houston. Today, we have 8 applicants for every slot in the freshman class. 8 applicants, like 24,000 people for 3,500 students, 3,300 students. The SAT scores of entering freshmen have gone up almost 100 points since she's been there. She is a game changer for us. When she became president, our income from patents that the University of Houston owned was about $800,000 a year. $800,000. When she got here, she hired a full-time staff to do nothing but commercialize our intellectual properties. In the year ending August 31st, the income from patents was $24 million. An amazing, amazing achievement. The Texas legislature meets in January, and we have a full agenda. I'm chairman of the Political Action Committee of the University of Houston. I would encourage any of you to be a part of that group. We have an aggressive agenda for the legislative session, and we have important things to do, tuition revenue bonds and so forth. The president has now announced that we're going to go for a medical school. It'll take 5 years, but I have no doubt that she can do it. I'm going to stop right there and take any questions that anybody might have. I know time is kind of short here now. In the mid-1800s, there were 2 political parties in Fort Bend County. One was called the Know-Nothings, and the other one was called the Peckerwoods. And the Know-Nothings were for staying with the Union, and the Peckerwoods were for abandoning the Union and going with the Confederacy. And that's where the Peckerwoods came from. Yes, sir.
I just want to comment. My dad graduated from the university in 1949 also.
He did.
He and my mom talked about living in the barracks there with 2 kids before I was born. And then he also talked about how after you've been at war and shot at, you weren't afraid of any professors. So how it was kind of different. And he was, when you were, I guess, 17, he was 30 years old and going to the university.
Wow.
So, different
It was, there's a guy named Pappy Bond who was chief of police of Houston for many, many years later. And they named him Pappy because he was the only father on the baseball team at the University of Houston. So he was a catcher. They called him Pappy Bond. He lived in those same apartments that your folks did. Yes, ma'am.
What advice would you give entrepreneurs today?
On what?
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs today?
Well, learn to smooze people that can help you. Don't think for 1 minute that anybody's success is because they're smart or this or that or whatever. It's because they have friends that can help them. R.A. Bob Smith, for God's sake. When I started Jamaica Beach, he bought the land for cash and sold it to me for $1 down. So learning to smooze people that can help you. Now, how do you smooze people? You don't go do it by simply complimenting them and asking for something. You have to be of value to them. You have to help them. And they need to want to see you walk in the door. They don't want to. You don't want them to dread seeing you because you're going to ask for something else. So I'd say smoozing important people. And by the way, I mentioned about knowing everybody when I was 25. The way I did that was by politics. I learned that if you're on the fundraising committee of the mayor of Houston, you can go see anybody you want to see. So I'd call up Jim Elkins and I'd say, the mayor asked me to call. And they'd put me right through. And I'd say, the mayor asked me to stop by and pick up a check for the campaign. And he said, come on over. So I, early on, using politics and the fundraising part of politics, not yard signs, the fundraising part, I got to know everybody in Houston of any importance. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
You've also often taught us as kids to be positive and to get over any mistakes you made. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay, she said, how do you get over mistakes? You've got to focus on the mistake. You've got to develop a plan to get around it. And then forget about it. There's no time to suck your thumb. I remember after the 80s crash, I still knew business people that were broke, and they still wanted to talk about how much they used to have and this, that, and the other thing. You've got to get over it. You've got to forget about it and leave it alone and drop it and move on down the road. All right, I'll take one more question if there is any. I think the time is late. If not, thank you very much. First of all, let me ask you a question. How many people here have heard of Dr. Red Duke? I bumped into Red Duke at the River Oaks Country Club about a month ago. Red is an old man, but he's not as old as I, but he's 82 or something. So Red says, welcome, you know you're getting old when you tell your best friend that you're having an affair and he wants to know who's catering it. Thank you.